Welcome everyone to another episode of Get Tech Smart. I am your host, Flo Nicholas. Listen, by now, hopefully you're familiar with our show. If not, welcome. This is a show where I talk about all things techie happening right here in our state of New Hampshire. So today we have an exciting show. We're going to be talking about biotechnology and recruiting, and I hope you're excited as I am. So welcome today. So I'm just going to go down the line here. So we have Carina Clingman. You're one of the founders and the CEO. And I'll tell you the name of the company in a second. And then we also have Alison Hall. You're also a founder as well. Just remind me your title.
Yeah, I'm actually not a founder. I'm the chief operating officer.
Oh, okay. Well, we should make you a founder, right? Let's just make everybody a founder. All right. So as you guys know, I am terrible with names. So I'm going to spell out the name of the company. Well, I'm not going to spell it out. I'm going to try to pronounce it. So you said it's Recruitomics.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like genomics or economics. So
Right.
it actually means the study of, that suffix O-M-I-C-S.
Okay.
That's like the study of recruiting. Yeah,
I love that.
Very scientific.
And right now, just before we started recording, funny enough, I'm seeing someone do a post. They're a LinkedIn influencer, and they're doing a post about how recruiting shouldn't be a full-time job, right? And now I'm talking about in terms of the person actually applying. Right, job candidates are constantly complaining about just the, how brutal it is on the job market.
Yeah.
But today we're going to focus on the biotech market, what's going on, and why we should be paying attention to that market. Because typically, to be honest with you, don't really put a lot of emphasis on that market.
Yeah, that's a good point. In New Hampshire, that makes a lot of sense. We are up and coming, I'd say, in the biotech market. We are hoping to change that. There's some great organizations. I know you've spoken with a lot of them here, but we typically think of Army, which is based in Manchester area.
Yeah.
And we are hoping to help some small companies stay here, but we do typically work with companies in Cambridge, across the United States as well, San Francisco, North Carolina, the hubs.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you guys have more of like a niche with startup companies.
Yeah.
Okay. And Alison, what's your role in all this fun process of dealing with biotechnology?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I'm one of the few people who work for the company that is not a PhD level scientist.
Okay.
My background is more in communications and really corporate management. And so it's really interesting for me because I get exposed to a lot of things that are so fascinating. And then sometimes I have to, talk to someone and be like, okay, I need you to explain what this job description actually means. But that's the really great thing is that with our team, they all have a PhD in a scientific discipline. So what we do is support these up and coming startups and basically say, to your point, recruiting should not be a full-time job if you are a scientist trying to build a life-saving drug.
Right.
Let us do that. We understand the science, and we can really talk to other scientists and drill down on what you're looking for, whereas a recruiter who's maybe more of a generalist who doesn't have that scientific background is going to be someone like me who looks at this long list of scientific terms and thinks, okay, sure. I'm sure I can source someone who has that in their LinkedIn.
Right.
It really allows our team to drill down into what does this team actually need in order to produce these life-saving drugs and come up with these therapeutics.
Right.
So in my role, I really get to do what I enjoy, which is more the internal growth of our team, the strategy into what makes sense for some of these small companies. You don't really need to understand the science to understand how a company has to grow and scale. So that's what I get to do. I get to leave the science to the scientist and work on the actual corporate growth strategy of both ours and some of our client companies.
Yeah. So let's unwind a little bit, right? And let's talk about why you started the company in the first place and why focus on biotech. So let's talk about your background.
Yeah, so Alison hit the nail on the head. When I was actually leaving my PhD, I started to interview for jobs. And the first thing I noticed was that the recruiters, while perfectly nice people, didn't have very much of a background in science to be able to explain why the company was exciting, why I should care about the role, what my day-to-day would be.
Yeah.
And I was also getting outreach for roles that I would say were not appropriate for me because I'm a biochemist, but it doesn't mean I've done everything in biochemistry. There's a lot. It's actually a huge umbrella. And so I remember getting outreach for a job in NMR, which I don't do. It's nuclear magnetic resonance.
Oh, wow.
It
sounds
not
so geeky.
I know, it does, right? And I collaborated with somebody who did that, but I couldn't tell you thing one about setting up an experiment or running an experiment for
Neither
NMR.
could I, but
Yeah. So, but a recruiter doesn't know that because
Right.
it is a biochemistry technique. So, I thought, so I'm a little bit entrepreneurial, I'll say that. So there was a clear niche and a need for somebody who had a passion for speaking with scientists, both in the companies and outside of the companies, and making those connections with more of that scientific bent.
You bring up a fantastic point, right? That niche, because that happened to me a couple of years ago when I was interviewing for legal roles.
Yeah.
And I would ask legal related questions. And then the recruiter would be like, well, I'm not a lawyer. You're going to have to talk to the hiring manager.
Yeah.
Right? So you're excited to get on the call and you make this list of all these questions, and then the person who's essentially doing the vetting does not speak your language, right?
Yeah.
So it can make it a little bit like, oh, okay.
Sounds like you have an idea for a company.
Yeah, there you go. Hey, listen, I could be a co-founder.
Yeah.
Not like I don't have anything else to do with my time. So just walk me through the process, right? Because not every recruiting agency is the same. So I'm Flo Nicholas, PhD scientist, and I'm looking for work. Walk me through the process.
Yeah, so from your perspective, you would not know that we are not part of the companies that we're working with.
Oh.
So we actually approach recruiting really differently than most firms. So I'm sure people are familiar with like a fractional CFO. So a baby company needs a CFO, but they don't need the full-time work of a CFO. They need 5 hours a week of that CFO's time. We do that, but for talent. So we are the entire talent acquisition function of a small company. We do the strategy, the recruiting, the scheduling, the candidate communications, the
Wow.
nurturing, all of those things that you would expect like a company like Pfizer or BMS. They have a team of probably 30 people doing those things. So we help the little companies have all of that expertise in-house because we're fractional for them.
Yeah.
And then they can compete with those bigger companies and those talent engines that
Yeah.
exist in those companies. So from your perspective, PhD Flo Nicholas, you would not know.
That might happen.
It could. You wouldn't know. You would think, oh, this is a really knowledgeable recruiter. Like, what a lucky company. They have a PhD level recruiter telling me exactly what the day-to-day is. And, we really do know because we craft a lot of times we get in really early. We craft the entire branding strategy for these clients. So you as a candidate would have a really seamless experience. The emails would be coming from the company. You would be, shepherded through the process within the company.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense because I've gone through several interviews where it's like it's clear that I'm dealing with a contractor, right? Someone who's not directly, in the company.
Yeah.
But to your point, you're saying you wouldn't even notice that.
Not usually. We're not hiding it. If a candidate asks, we absolutely are upfront with them that we are a contractor, but it rarely comes up because it's a pretty seamless kind of process.
What do you think is some of the myths for this smaller startup companies? Like, do you think they wait too long to engage your recruiting services? Like, what should a startup company that's working in this industry be thinking of, like, from day one?
I think a lot of it comes down to, I can give you a real life example. We spoke to someone not too long ago that was looking to hire us to come in and help with their talent acquisition strategy because this individual was running the entire HR function and trying to make all these hires. It was an international company and they were trying to scale exponentially. This person was so overworked and so exhausted, and we get that all the time.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it is understanding the cost of the employee. It's looking at your employee and saying, is this a good use of your time and of the company's money? Like, is it really a good use of your HR director to be screening candidates and going through the initial process? Of course, they should talk to them at the end or somewhere through the process, but that's not really a good use of anyone's time or money when you could talk to an expert and get a result much faster. I mean, if you put up a job post on LinkedIn or Indeed, you're getting thousands of applicants. That is just so much for someone to go through. Whereas if you work with a fractional provider, in any industry, they're going to be the expert on that. They're going to have the tools you don't have access to. They can streamline that whole function. So I think a lot of the myths are around, the time benefit cost analysis. And it's not necessarily more expensive to outsource a lot of functions. I mean, most people outsource their legal functions, really. It's the same thing. It's expensive unless, you get sued, or it's more expensive to bring in someone to do it in-house and pay benefits and do all of that. So I think that's a really good comparable analysis, is if you're outsourcing your legal, there's other aspects you can outsource. Your, fractional CFOs are a great example, like you said. And I think people don't think about outsourcing their talent, but that's absolutely something that many firms do, and a lot of small companies just don't realize that that's an option for them.
Right. I think probably with smaller companies or startup companies, and as an entrepreneur, you can relate to this. You're always thinking about budget, right? You're not thinking about essentially, what makes sense, right? In terms of freeing up my time, and I'm speaking to myself when I'm saying this.
We all are.
Is freeing up your time to get other things done that are more urgent than, essentially wearing like many hats. So one of the other things that I hear a lot, and being somebody who, was on the job market a couple of years ago, one of the stresses is just that process of submitting your resume, and you said with LinkedIn, Indeed, and some of these places, depending on the role, they get in thousands of applications. How are you maintaining the human-centric aspect of recruiting?
That's a great question. With technology, it's becoming a little bit easier. So I know that you love AI and love talking about AI, so I can talk about AI here
Let's
a little
do
bit.
it.
Yeah. So there are a lot of new tools coming out, and we've actually just adopted one that we're very excited about because it's going to give us that ability. So a lot of people think, AI is going to take away that human aspect, but it actually allows us to engage every single applicant where that wasn't possible before. So now when a candidate applies, we can automatically start a text exchange with them to let them allow their personality to come through a little bit, because the application's so dry, right? It's a resume. And then we're going to be able to say, hey, thanks so much for your application. Do you want to expand a little on your experience in XYZ area? And let them start to bring some of themselves to the table there. And that is, the candidates that are really engaged are going to filter to the top, because we're going to start to see them engaging. They don't have to engage, but it's recommended. And then it allows us to, when we're going back through we have 150,000 plus candidates in our database that we've worked with over the past 10 years.
Oh my gosh.
And what we don't want to do is lose those relationships, but that's a huge number of candidates. So this AI tool also, when we start a new job search, it starts to filter people up based on our notes, our past interactions, and things like that, so that we can then go back and say, oh, you know what? We talked to you 5 years ago. How is your career now? So it's kind of exciting how we're leveraging that. But I think from the candidate perspective too, we've recently started a sister company. And Alison is a co-founder on that company.
Oh, nice. See, I was somewhat right. I was thinking about that.
That company is for candidate education, because we have heard through the years so many candidates really frustrated with the process. And the problem with getting your PhD is you finish, or your master's, really anything in science, you finish and you know a lot about your thing you studied. I'm the world expert, or I was at least 10 years ago, on this RNA binding protein called Musashi. It's super important. I'm sure you've heard of it. So we emerge with this enormous depth of knowledge in such a narrow area. I could not have told you how a drug was made. I didn't know the career paths in biotech. I had no idea. And so there's a huge gap of knowledge there. So we've set up this company to fill that gap and to help people to even understand how to craft a resume, because really, it's marketing yourself. It is. And nobody knows how to do that very well.
It's like you literally have to be your own influencer.
You do.
Right? And I think I love the fact that you brought up AI, because I'm actually going to be writing an article this weekend about how, from the recruiting standpoint, how recruiters are leveraging AI. But then we also have from the candidate standpoint, how they're leveraging AI. Because now you have AI tools that will scan your resume. And then not only just scan your resume, but you can also scan the job description. And then you can determine, what percentage, of keywords and skills do I have, and do they match up, right? So if it's showing I have like 20%, then you got to start looking, and reassessing, like, do I qualify for this job, or do I have to rethink it?
Yeah.
So definitely AI is, to your point, I still can see the connection of having that human-centric connection.
Oh, yeah.
Because now you're really leveraging AI to try to avoid ghosting. And to be honest, the statistics show that there are a lot of job candidates who would rather get an automated, thank you for applying, we're not moving forward with your resume at this time, than to get absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
So I love the fact that you're leveraging technology to do that. And the point that you made about the resumes and maybe talking with somebody from 5 years ago, but being able to scan through essentially your depository of resumes, it's funny you mentioned that, because I was on a call with these 2 students in like Germany that are writing a book on AI for recruiting. And that's one of the things I said to them, how AI can be leveraged by recruiters, because half the time, and I hear the stories, it's happened to me, you go to a recruiting agency, they're like, yeah, we'll take your resume, we'll have it on file, and then you never hear from them again.
Yeah.
And it's like, I feel like my resumes are probably somewhere just floating in dust.
Yep.
Right? But now you're leveraging AI to help you stay on top and track off, hey, I know we just spoke about a couple of months ago, but there's a role that just came up.
Yeah, we're very excited about that.
That is fantastic.
Yeah.
That is awesome. And that is one great way to get people to want to work with you.
It is. And, we used to do keyword searches, but now with AI, this tool, and it's new to us, so I will get back to you on how well it works. It's supposed to sort of predict career trajectory. So if somebody we have a resume from 5 years ago, the AI will look at other similar folks and think, well, they might be at this level. This might be someone you reach out to and ask, how is your career going?
Incredible.
So
that
that's neat.
predictive analysis. That is fantastic. That is, when we talk about just the impact of technology on all industries, this is like what you're detailing is just a fantastic example.
Yeah, we're excited.
So right now, when we look at the biotech industry, what is the current landscape? Is there massive hiring? Let's start with that part, and I got more questions, juicy questions.
I'll let you take this first.
Okay. I would say my personal opinion of this, there's a lot of talk going on right now, so I will couch this with my personal opinion of this, is that we are looking at an optimistic landscape. It's been a really, really tough year. I think anyone in biotech would certainly agree with that. We've seen a significant number of layoffs, of reduction in force, and of biotechs just shuttering. Venture capital has been really tight, so their funding has not been there the way we've seen it historically over the past few years. You see this across a lot of the tech industry. We've seen a lot of layoffs across, automotive, all the different industries. Some people attribute that to overhiring during COVID. It was really, candidates market. So there is a leveling off. I will say that from what I'm seeing come across my desk and in the news and everything, it looks as though we may be turning a corner there. And I think that we will see more companies going for IPOs, getting the venture funding. I think we're seeing an uptick. We're starting to see from our end more interest in people bringing on our firm to help them with their hiring plans. People are looking ahead to 2024. So my optimistic assessment is that 2023 was a really big recalibration year, and it was really challenging, and it was really difficult for a lot of people and a lot of biotechs, and people were put in terrible situations and had to make really bad, just gut-wrenching decisions about what they were going to do to maintain either a skeleton crew or shut their companies. But I do think in 2024 things are looking like they're going to improve, and I think that that will trickle down to candidates, and hopefully we'll see biotech really bounce back. And the tech industry as a whole. It's been very, very tough for anyone in talent acquisition. I will say that. You see a lot of layoffs happening to recruiters. So would you agree with?
Absolutely, yeah. We're seeing, so at the beginning you mentioned too, recruiting shouldn't be your full-time job. I think that goes for candidates, shouldn't have to apply as their full-time job, and recruiters are not going to be recruiting as their full-time job. They also need to start to pivot, use more tools, some of these AI tools, but also start to really think strategically for their companies. And so one one thing that we really hammer home with our services is that we are strategists too. So talent isn't just about hiring, it's about setting your company up to hire well. What does that plan look like? The actual hiring can be done really intentionally. And then how do you retain and keep your employees super happy?
The other important R word.
Yes.
Yeah, right? Retaining, retention.
So that's really, I think if the recruiters who survive for the next, I've heard about 18 months, is we're going to see a lot of recruiters losing jobs to AI and things like that. However, I think the strategists are going to be the ones that are key, because that's not going away.
No, it's not, right? And yes, although automation is going to cause some job displacement, there's also going to be a need for people who really know how to leverage those tools, really understand, okay, this tool is spitting out all this data. How do I read this data? What does this mean? And how can I be a strategist and be able to go to a business and say, hey, based on, you know, this data I'm seeing here, here's my recommendations for you in your workforce. And I know you look like you have something to add.
No, I was just going to say, you know, it's interesting when we talk about, you know, what happened over the past several months. The company that Carina referenced, the one that we started, it's called the Collaboratory. That was actually as a direct result for all the layoffs we've been seeing in biotechs. So the idea behind that is to actually really help those affected employees configure their materials and all of their collateral. Like we were saying, it's basically marketing collateral. To help them get back into a job, or to really give them the support, because it's been such an impact on the industry that it's really hard to be laid off. It's really hard to not work. And so this community is really there to support these people and to give them kind of a sounding board that's maybe not their partner or their friends. And so I think that the hope is that when we see this turnaround, you know, there'll be this great pool of people who have all these materials ready to go. Because to both of your points with AI, you know, you do have to have the things that are ready and that they're accessible for these AI tools to parse through. And sometimes people submit documents in formats that are just, they're not, it's not possible for the AI tools to parse them out.
Yeah, and you're so right. So we've been saying biotech a lot, but I think we kind of need to digest down a little bit what that means, right? What are some of those jobs that you're seeing in demand that fall under that biotech umbrella?
Yeah, so it's been interesting since the pandemic. We had a shift to remote work, but there were a lot of people who still had to be in labs. So lab jobs are still very much in demand. There is more automation in labs, so we are seeing people who have the ability to work with those automated tools. People who can do a little bit of their own coding are really valuable, because they can not only do the experiment, the wet lab experiment, but they can also write a program to analyze it, or they can write a program that works with the robot that helps them to do it faster and more efficiently. So that's really key, and that's sort of coming naturally. This new crop of PhD students coming out, they're really versatile. They've already been doing that. They've been scrappy. There hasn't been a lot of funding for their research, so they're scrappy. They absolutely know how to do that, which is great to see. And then, you know, looking at people who are a little higher up in the company who have moved out of the lab, we're looking for leaders who are dynamic. They understand that changing workforce. They're comfortable working with a really diverse set of candidates. That we are, this Gen Z pool is the most diverse yet, and that's amazing to see. It does take a special skill set for a manager to be able to, you know, come in and be super effective there, where previously they had managed completely on-site teams. Now they're managing remote teams. They may be remote themselves. They may be in a different country. We're seeing all kinds of things like that. And so we're seeing people, you know, with these career paths, they're taking a little shimmy, which I think is good, and it's showing how versatile we are. But people have to be prepared to shimmy and to, you know, accept that things have changed, and technology is going to be very integral throughout this whole process.
I think you have to be flexible and adaptable. Now, when you're saying lab, like what type of labs are we talking about here? Because when I think lab, I'm thinking, you know, blood work at the hospital type of lab work.
No, so we can provide a little footage if that's helpful to your viewers. We are talking about labs where there's long benches and people are working with cells. They're working in tissue culture hoods. So it's not a place that people, you know, from the public would go to have something done. This is where the hard research gets done.
The research, like we're talking about drugs and medication and stuff like that.
So biotech is where these ideas are born. Pharma typically ends up licensing some of these things from biotech. So biotech is called biotech because it is the tech of bio, right? It is where we make these. We have these wild ideas. Somebody gets funding for it, and we just kind of go, and that's so fun. And then things do get into the clinic. We have lots of biotechs with assets in the clinic. But a lot of the time, they then partner with a pharmaceutical company to sort of bring things, to the consumer. That's sort of the progression that's, I don't know, canonical, that's normal that you would see.
Right.
Yeah.
So for someone who's like, hey, I don't have a master's, I don't have a PhD, you know what? I don't even know about this industry. But perhaps I've been a project manager or program manager or product manager at a tech company. Do you see some of these organizations willing to, for lack of a better word, take outsiders? like us, right?
Yeah. I'm going to kick it over to Allison. I will say your examples, specifically the product, the program managers, those do typically go to scientists. What they look for in those particular roles are people who have come up through the lab and really understand the process of developing a drug, even to the point of using the pipette, to do the experiment.
Okay.
But there are tons of jobs.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's still that requirement for lab work, right?
For those specific,
Okay,
I just wanted to say, since you picked out some specific ones
Right.
that we see a lot, those
Yeah.
program managers, those are very in-demand jobs.
Okay.
But they do usually require that someone's come up through the system and really understands
Right.
how to make a drug. But that doesn't mean there aren't a lot of opportunities for
Yeah.
non-scientists.
So entry level, or again, someone who wants to do a career pivot.
Yeah.
All right. Let's take me, for example.
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Lawyer, Juris Doctorate. Listen, chemistry was not my thing. I'm just going to be honest. I don't even know how I was in the honors chemistry at that, but that's another story. So someone like me, Juris Doctorate, right? I'm like, I want to look at a career in biotech.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really applicable to any industry. In any industry, you look at construction. You don't
Right.
need to know how to build the house, but someone has to figure out how to pay the bills,
Right.
make sure everything's legal and above board.
Right.
Someone has to sell the services, right?
Exactly.
So I think that in any industry, you can look at that and say, we have some specialized people. Like, yes, there are some people who they have to, you have to be a certified plumber. But that's not indicative of the entire industry or even the specific company. So in every company we have worked with, I cannot think of one of them that wouldn't have the need for someone who didn't have a PhD or a master's. Or really what we're also seeing is a shift away from necessarily needing those higher level degrees to saying, are you willing to learn? Because now there's a lot of certification programs and a lot of on-the-job training. And so there's a lot of talk around the gatekeeping of, education is expensive.
Yeah.
Education is not something easily accessible to everyone, unfortunately. And there's a lot of work. You do a lot of work about bringing STEM to, younger children, getting them involved earlier. And a lot of what we're starting to see people talk about is, have we put false barriers up to where, do we need everyone to have a PhD in order to do this job? And so we are seeing a big shift in the dynamic of what people are looking for and this, what level of degree they would need to have to do specific things, because a lot of things can be learned on the job.
Yeah.
And for anyone who is like myself and does not have a PhD, there's plenty of work to be done in biotechs. I mean, there's the HR function alone. I mean, that is a huge thing. The marketing. I mean, great. You've got this really cool idea. If you can't talk to people and sell your idea and make other people excited about it, then you're not.
Non-scientists excited about it too. You have to speak
Right.
common language.
Exactly, because you start spitting out the chemical compound and use that as marketing material, you're going to lose
No
a
one's
lot of
gonna buy
people.
that.
So you make a great point. Now, we're hearing a lot now. So we do hear DEI, but I think we're also trying to see more companies. Yes, they're going to incorporate, diversity, equity, inclusion, but I hear the term work culture. So when I think biotech, right, some people might think, oh my God, nerds, geeks.
That may be right.
Right? Not my environment, but what is the work culture? What are you seeing? Especially, I feel like for startup companies, some of them are really focused on really building this work culture where, there is a sense of, hey, you come in, you're respected, you're heard, and belonging. And I know you guys are really also big on advising on creating, diverse workplaces as well. So I would love to touch up on that for a little bit.
Yeah, it's so important. But our companies, I think, are really fun. So yes, they're nerdy, but in the coolest way.
Right.
If that makes sense. We have a podcast that we just started, and we were interviewing one of our past clients. See, we work with clients until they get to a certain kind of scale, and then they're going to hire their internal talent team. That's how fractional work works. But they have a whole Star Wars theme. Their whole office and like all their conference rooms and their awards and everything are it's
funny.
It's actually really fun. You know, it's lighthearted. But I think, you know, he talks a lot about culture building, and we hear that from all of our either, you know, heads of HR, chief human resources people, the folks that we're working with, you know, in the company.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's something that's important too to think about. You know, when we go back to the beginning of the conversation, what do people not think about? What are some of the myths? Some of the myths are that you can't go back and build your culture. You really need to go in and build it from the ground up, because that is, you know, that's the core. That's what you're building. That is your company ethos. And so one of the things we do when we partner with these firms is we don't just take the job description and say, like, okay, bye, we'll be back with your candidates. We actually meet with the teams a lot, and we really understand, like, what's your mission? What drives you? What's your culture? What do you want your culture to be? I mean, we've worked with companies that are 2 people before. They're literally building a company. And so what do you want this to look like in 5 years? Because those are the people that, you know, you want to bring onto your team, are the people who understand where you're going and where you want to get to.
Yeah.
And we're really big into saying, it's not a culture fit, it's a culture add. You don't want everyone to fit into your culture.
Right.
What you want to do is be able to add people who expand your culture, who make your culture stronger, bigger, better, bring a different perspective to it. So we work with our clients a lot to get them out of that culture fit mindset and think, okay, maybe 5 of your employees came from this one lab. Maybe they all came from Harvard. Let's think about culture adds. Who could bring something to your team that doesn't have the same background, education, et cetera, as everyone else, and think about how that's going to influence your team, stop groupthink. And so there's a lot of that goes on from the very early stages, and I think that's so critical when we talk about what do people think about when they're building a company. And again, doesn't have to be the PhD side of it. You need to bring in all the outside people and make sure that whatever you want your culture to be, these people are additions into that. And so I think getting real clear early on is something that's really important.
And we do a lot of training too with our clients, because they're young founders a lot of the time, or they're hiring scientists that are going to be in the lab, and then those scientists suddenly become hiring managers. But those scientists are, you know, they're new to the workforce. I won't say that they're young. That's not. It's when you get a PhD, sometimes you're in your 30s before you ever even think about leaving. So we have to train those individuals who are first-time managers when they do say something like, I know this lab at Harvard is great at that. And you look at their company and you think, well, the last thing you need is another Harvard person. So it's that education piece, or having somebody, a hiring manager, say, well, you know, I just don't think they would fit with our group. Really digging in, why did you use the word fit? What does that mean? And sort of getting really granular with what is the reasoning for that? And can we change a mind? Can we open an eye or change perspective?
No, I love that, right? Because I think sometimes when you see some of these traditional recruiting agencies, the focus is on, I'm getting paid to find this candidate that fits A, B through Z. And that's the focus, right? You're like, no, we are looking at the totality of it, right? Because what I hear here is that although we work for the organization, we also see the long term. Right, of this is I can bring you the cookie cutter version of what you're looking for, but what I want to do is help you create a work culture where we're bringing you the best people, but they're also going to stay.
To Carina's point, there's nothing better than when we start with a small company, we build them up to the point that we tell them, okay, we're now going to hire our replacements to be internal for you. You've hit the point to where, like, this doesn't make sense for us anymore. You're a big enough company. We have scaled with you as far as we can take you, so we will help you build your next function, which is your talent acquisition function. And that's when a company's really, you know, they're really grounded. They've got their full team. They're ready to really stand on their own. And it's probably, I would assume, a little bit something that people in the legal field see. There is probably a break point to where it doesn't make sense to have outside consultants come in and help you with legal work. You really need to build an in-house legal team. But that's not the early days. That's down the path. And so I think that that's one of our big metrics for success, is when we do have a client that we say, oh, they're a past client because they didn't need us anymore because we grew them to the point they didn't. That's a big win for us.
And we have great relationships with those clients too, so that's awesome.
And that's the retention piece of it all, right? That's
retention matters, right? It's I'll bring you the candidate, but if I'm not ensuring that it's a good culture add for both the candidate and the organization, we're going to be right back where we started, where they're looking for somebody else for the same position. So I think I see here your focus on value add,
Yes.
right, for that organization as well
Yeah.
as the job candidate.
It's very consultative.
Yeah.
That's how we approach it. I will also say that we have let go of clients because they were not willing to be open-minded about how they're growing their company, and that's really important to us. We have, I say that candidates don't know that we work, externally, but if they look us up on LinkedIn, they know we have to have a
Right.
good relationship with these candidates, and our reputation is really important. So we won't send candidates to a company that we don't feel is growing in an intentional way,
Right.
I'll say.
Yeah.
Where the culture is not good.
And
Yeah.
which is fantastic, right? And that's the way it's supposed to be,
Yeah.
right? It's, hey, this is, and I was just on a call this morning where we're talking about that, how when organizations are talking about, internally creating these inclusive workplaces, it also impacts who you decide to do business with.
Yeah.
And what they stand for.
Yep.
So kudos to you for doing that. So I'm huge on TikTok. I love watching some of these TikTok videos, and there's been this like big TikTok trend, like, oh my goodness, guys, September through October is the best time to look for work right after Labor Day.
It is.
And then I was like, is it really? So I went and I did some digging, and it's like, well, no, it's like after Christmas. So help me understand, is there really like, hey, you gotta look for work on this month to do this month? Like, tell us the tricks of the trade here. Is there any?
I would start by saying the best time to look for work personally is when you feel like you need to look for
Right.
work.
Yeah.
Like, do not hold
There you
off
go.
on looking for work because
Yeah.
of a certain time of year. Because my point earlier, 2 years ago, there was no bad time to look for work in
Right.
biotech, right?
Right.
It was booming. Yes, now it is a little bit slower. We still see plenty of hiring. I will say that I think that there is some validity to September and October being a very, very good time because people are finishing up their budgets for the year. They want to use that allocated budget. If they haven't done that yet, then the hiring managers are really itchy to get their
Yeah.
teams built out. Likewise, January, they get their new budgets typically if they're running on, that same fiscal year.
Yeah.
And then they're going to want to, make their hires quickly.
Exactly.
Summertime, you are dealing with a lot of vacations. Hiring managers
Yeah.
are out. Things can slow down. That is
Did hear
real.
that? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. On point. And one of the other things that I saw is that right now the data is showing that when someone wants to, so I have a job, but I want to get a new job. It looks like job candidates these days are demanding some pretty hefty pay increases. So essentially the report I saw said most job candidates right now won't leave their current position unless their salary bump is about like $80,000. So what are you seeing in terms of salaries, and is the biotech industry a lucrative industry to be in? And I know we said, hey, there's some roles where it doesn't matter if you have a master's or a PhD, but can that be the icing on the cake that helps you command a high salary?
Yeah, a lot of questions there.
Yeah, a lot of stuff. So the first one is,
I'll
what are
answer.
you seeing in terms
Yeah.
of bump up for salaries? Are these startups willing to pay, right? Because, well, let me just clarify this too. Sometimes when people hear startup, they think, oh, broke company. So let's start with that part.
Yeah, so not so broke company is not the trend in biotech, because typically when we start hiring for these companies, they know they have to be competitive, and they do have seed funding, venture funding, PE funding. So they do have a lump of money behind them, and they know what that runway is going to be.
Right.
You do need to do your research on which private equity or which VC is funding them. Some are better than others at helping those companies to allocate that money. So we love some of our venture capital partners. We love working with Flagship. Particularly, they do a really good job of building companies that are well-resourced. They pay really well. They have all the benefits. And they grow intentionally, and they have the money behind it. So you can do your research, and you'll find some are better than others. As far as the salaries that we've seen, during the pandemic, there was a lot of both salary and title inflation.
Okay. Listen.
Yeah.
Please tell me the numbers. Okay, I'm like at the edge of my
Yeah.
seat here,
Okay.
waiting for those numbers.
I'm happy to. So I can tell you that in 2019, typically we have all the research for this, and we study this pretty actively. In 2019, when we were hiring a brand new PhD, no postdoc, just finished a PhD looking for that first job, we were looking at about 100,000, 105,000 as a base salary, plus bonuses and benefits, but just cash salary. By the end of 2021, that number was up to 130 to 140,000 for a brand new PhD with no experience at all. And that number is coming back down now because that wasn't real. That in a 2-year period, we did see inflation, but we didn't see that much inflation. So
So you know what? I'm gonna extend. Because normally by now I'm cutting off the show. This is getting juicy. I want to ask this because I see this happen a lot with students. And I know for example, with my husband, when he's an electrical engineer. He's actually working his PhD. But when he finished his bachelor's, because he was a vet, so he was using his GI Bill.
Yeah.
When he was like, hey, I want to go get my master's, I'm like, that's great, but you need to start working. Because you want to start, showing on-the-job skills. Yep. Because that way, when you finish your master's, you are going to be able to say, hey, I'm commanding X salary because I already have, hands-on experience. Yeah. And now when he finishes his PhD, he'll be able to do the same thing. Mm-hmm. Do you think, your opinion, and you can use studies, or it could be just your opinion, do you think that students who, start from their bachelor's and they go to their master's and they carry on right to their PhD and don't put in any time to get that real-world experience, do you think that's a bad idea when it comes to commanding higher pay?
I actually do have some data around that.
Yes, I love data.
So in the scientific, so we're just talking about biotech. I think this is unique to biotech. But the answer is no, you're not going to command much more than you would have. I actually know somebody specifically that he probably commanded a little bit more. I knew him in my PhD. He had gotten his bachelor's and his master's. He went and worked for industry for a couple of years and realized for his career trajectory that he wants, which he's really sharp. He probably wants to be like CSO of a company, chief scientific officer someday. But he came back to his PhD. He came back to do a PhD because he realized he couldn't really break through a sort of a ceiling that was which actually doesn't exist anymore. So it's interesting because now we're not seeing that as much. But it used to be you couldn't break into a scientist title without a PhD. Mm-hmm. Now you can, you absolutely can. It's really common in companies. But anyway, he went back, he got his PhD, he went out into the workforce, and I actually hired him at one of the companies that we were consulting for. And he talked to me about this very thing, and he said, well, I worked for 3 years, and I said, that's great. The company has the salary band which you would fit into, and I can bring you in at the top of that band, but there's actually no room for more than that because you still have the same kind of pedigree that somebody who went in, did their PhD, then worked for a couple of years afterward would have. So we were able to give him a little bit of a bump, but a few thousand.
It doesn't matter. So what are they looking at then? Is it the total years worked, or like what is?
Yeah.
Because the same kind of ideology is similar in the legal world.
Yeah.
Right? Because I kind of faced the same hurdle as a lawyer because I practiced for like 3 years. Mm-hmm. Then I went corporate for 7.5 years, but I was on the business side of the house. Yeah. So even though my corporate role was like, hey, negotiating contracts, managing outside counsel, and doing all that stuff, the legal department would not count my 7.5 years as legal experience. Yeah. So they dinged me as insufficient experience.
Interesting.
So I'm wondering how, it still hurts, but okay. But I'm wondering how that, you know what I mean? I'm still curious as to this, is there this magic formula that gets used to kind of assess experience and the salaries?
Not in larger companies, there probably is a magic formula. We don't work with larger companies. We work with little companies. And so there's a lot more flexibility there. Okay. So I don't know which job that was for you, but was it with a bigger company where they, yeah, exactly. So they probably do have a formula. And I bet Pfizer does. I bet they have a formula. Right. We don't work with them. So for us, we have a lot of ability to take a candidate's experience and market them. Right. We partner with the companies, but we also want our candidates to we want them to stick, right? So
Yeah.
if we lowball them and they come in, they're not going to stay with our companies.
No.
So it's in everyone's best interest to give them an offer they like, that they're excited about. So we do have flexibility there. It's
Okay.
just not going to exactly translate. So for instance, someone coming in from a totally different field altogether and making the change, but they maybe have 10 years of work experience and then they went and got a PhD and now they're in biotech, we would give them some credit for that 10 years, but it wouldn't necessarily be a full 10, they wouldn't come in at the director level. Because then you would if with 10 years of experience if you had done it all in biotech.
Right.
Does that make sense?
No, that definitely makes sense. So one of the things like that I'm seeing now with the AI boom is and we're seeing this demand for people with how to build AI models and all this stuff, and companies like Netflix, $900,000, pay scales. So I guess I'm a little surprised because from 100, 130, I was thinking with the biotech industry, I'm going to hear things like, you went from $3 to $600,000. But again, I guess we also have to remember is a lot of the companies that you're working with are up and coming. They're startup companies that are essentially building, right? So there is that flexibility for someone who's gone to school, who's trying to get that opportunity to get that hands-on learning, that you could grow and build with this organization. Because are they also doing stuff like giving equity, for example?
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And, to go back, I think that's a really interesting point you talked about with the PhD trajectory and the experience in between, how that will impact your salary. Because I think that if you are going to work in a biotech and you do not have a PhD and you are going into an HR function, legal, communications, I actually do think having the experience and then going back to school will garner you a higher salary. I think it's very different. So that's two sides of the same coin.
Okay. That makes sense.
What I want to see from an operations side is maybe someone who came in, they got some hands-on experience in a company, they realized what they liked, what they didn't like, and then they went and fine-tuned that skill. So maybe they got an MBA.
Got it.
But a lot of MBA programs won't even accept you unless you've actually had work experience. So I think that I would just leave viewers with the idea that definitely do your research around that, because depending on what your interest is in working in a biotech, there's two very different answers for that question.
No, and you're right. And I don't think every company is different, right? It's like, when you see some of these salary releases, you see a difference between what Microsoft is paying to Google, to other companies. Yeah. So definitely do your research. So the STEM industry, the predictions are like, hey, there's going to be more jobs than there are people that are available for the industry. In closing, what do you see? I know you mentioned, hey, 2024 is looking like it's potentially going to be a really hot year. But to young kids listening, especially college students or high school students who are kind of like, not sure what career field I want to get into, what is your pitch to them in terms of, hey, you might want to start looking at this biotechnology industry?
I mean, we're not going to make enough scientists in this country to keep up with the demand. So the problem is a lot of people aren't exposed to, because we have these hubs. If you don't live near a hub, you may never meet a scientist. So how would you know that you want that to be your career? So we need to do a better job of getting the word out. I would say I decided to be a scientist in middle school because I had a really cool science teacher who blew things up in the parking lot.
Nice.
So there's sometimes there's like a moment, and it's funny, but a lot of scientists can tell you the moment they were like, oh, this science thing is cool. So I'm so excited for your C Science Center event that's coming up. Like, these are the sorts of things that we need more of, because maybe at that event, somebody is going to see something cool, and that's going to be the thing they look back on and say, yep, there was this event, and I saw this pig heart that was, just totally blew my mind. Yeah,
we're not blowing anything up in the parking lot that night. I will feed you and give you food. Hopefully that's enough motivation.
It's a great draw.
Yeah.
Food especially.
I think, to that point too, we're at a point in time where the information is so accessible. So I would say if you are interested in something, YouTube. Wealth of knowledge. You can go on and learn anything about anything from someone who's probably an expert. There's so many free courses you can take. There's so many, Harvard, MIT, they all put out free courses. So I would say even if you're interested in something that you think is so nerdy and you don't want any of your friends to know about,
Yeah.
it's probably something really cool that a bunch of people one day are going to want to pay you money to do. So
Right.
like, find those resources and enjoy it, because it, you know, those are going to be the things that bring you passion and like enjoyment in your life. So I think in high school and middle school, there's such a drive to fit in, to maybe,
Yeah.
you know, temper your interest. And those are the things that are going to make you really interesting in your 20s and 30s and help you build this really robust, cool career. So I would
Right.
just say there's tons of resources out there. If it's not in your immediate community, it's probably online somewhere. There's so many things now that exist that I think are just incredible tools for people, and you just got to go out there and find them.
Yeah. And what can New Hampshire do? Us, you know, besides my event, but how can the existing and growing New Hampshire biotech company really make some noise, shake things up so that we're not losing people across the border, but we're actually attracting people, you know, to come, you know, across the border to us?
Yeah, I think it's going to come down to we as a state need to make a bit of an investment.
Yeah.
I think what was really interesting was last year there was a Tech Alliance event where we brought in a speaker from Massachusetts, and she said she was at the table 20 years ago when they made a conscious decision that Cambridge was going to be a biotech epicenter, and the state threw money at it. There was a PR campaign. It was a marketing campaign. When it actually came down to it and we asked, like, well, how did that happen? It was a good marketing campaign that was getting the word out about the resources that companies could have in the ecosystem, and it was social events, things like that. So I think if we have a chance, and I feel like that's getting more vocal, we got to just get loud about it.
We do.
Yeah.
We do. And I am willing to be the hype person. Army, just if you need a hype person for your organization, I'm right here. Same thing for you guys. And that's why they're here, because I'm hyping them up. And
we appreciate it.
Yeah, listen, my pleasure. And Alison, what do you think? How can we hype things up here in New Hampshire when it comes to biotech?
I mean, I think you hear it a lot. We're a humble state, right? So it's basically the same thing. We have to brag about how great we are.
Yeah.
We have so many incredible amenities here. We have so many up and coming cool restaurants. I mean, there are so many. We have great museums. We have a lot of things that would attract families and people to stay here. Our education systems, we have great universities. We have great access to all sorts of fabulous things. We need to hype those things up to that point. I think we also need to think about things that are a little outside my scope of being able to speak super intelligently about, but housing's a problem. We have a housing shortage. I am a big proponent that we should have more public transportation in the state. I think running a train line would make a really big impact, because it would allow people to get to the Cambridge corridor and allow for that flow of business to be, it would just be much more efficient than, you know, right now we go into Boston a lot and I have to plan an entire day around sitting in traffic, and I only live 45 minutes away. So I think there's some infrastructure that really needs to come into play. And I think that's where, if we sat down and made a conscious decision and said, okay, we are going to leverage all of the great universities, the great colleges, the great education system, all of the really good things that make New Hampshire, New Hampshire. How do we invest into this? And I know there's a lot of talk about this. I'm not saying anything that other people haven't said, but I think we are at the point of, in order to compete with other up and coming areas like Research Triangle Park down in North Carolina, we need these things to come to fruition.
Right. Well said. Hands down, 100%. And I think the other thing is we need to collaborate together.
Yeah.
Sometimes we get into silos and everybody has their own message. And I feel like together we can be stronger when we come together and pull all our resources together.
Yeah.
And I think one organization that could also be the top cheerleader of this is Army. So I'm talking to you guys on this. But guys, it's been fantastic having you here. I learned so much. And if you're looking to learn more or, you know, pursue a career in biotech, maybe you have a PhD and looking for your next new job, because apparently now is the time to look. Then you need to contact, right? And what is, you just give us your website.
Yeah, they can go to recruitomics.com. It's recruitomics.com. And if they are looking for a job, we have a free Slack community where they can actually interact directly with us.
Free?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And they can get their questions answered about biotech or job seeking or really anything.
Right.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that I've been referring people to them who, you know, seem like they might have some potential transferable skills.
Good.
And Alison, you've been fantastic. She's been very responsive and immediately getting back to all my referrals. So I really appreciate that because I do not refer people to just anyone. So I appreciate that a lot. And again, thank you so much both for being here. And let's see how we can work together to make some noise and put that spotlight that is so needed in the biotech community right here in New Hampshire. To everyone at home, thank you for watching another episode of Get Tech Smart. Stay tuned for more.